Hello again, people. Thank you for joining us on this latest episode of Across the Pond podcast with Taxpayers Protection Alliance Consumer Center with me, Lindsay Stroud, and Martin Culp, our International Fellow. Thank you for joining us, Martin. Today we have a really fun guest on. I've known him for a while myself, actually. So Greg Troutman has been a business commercial lawyer for nearly 3 decades and is based out of Kentucky. Since 2013, he's been doing this way too long. Greg has represented the small mom and pop vapor businesses, and a lot has happened since then. As a vape lawyer, Greg has represented shops and many e-cigarette manufacturers, from e-liquid companies to companies that produce vaping batteries. He's also challenged a state monopoly and has assisted state vape associations. And most recently, Greg has provided counsel to companies as they face the Food and Drug Administration's recent regulatory nightmare, which is the pre-market tobacco product application process, or the PMTAs. Greg, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's exciting. And I've known you since for a minute now, and I was in the trenches back in 2016, and I didn't know that you'd already been doing that for nearly half a decade by the time that I met you.
Yeah, it's been going on for a while, and it started small and has progressively gotten larger. And little did I expect 10 years ago that I would be doing this. I didn't really even know what an e-cigarette was 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, a lot of e-cigarettes have changed. So, we could sit here for all day talking about everything back then, but what I really wanted to talk to you about was these pre-market tobacco applications. People who are in our space are very well aware of these, but can you kind of explain what they are and like what's going on currently right now with that?
Well, a pre-market tobacco application with reference to the vape industry is sort of a misnomer, because it's not pre-market, it's really post-market. Products that were on the market as of August 8th, 2016, had to file an application with the FDA to get authority to stay on the market. And the law is that any product that was introduced into commerce after February 15th, 2007 has to apply for market application to stay on the market. The PMTA requires the manufacturers to show a whole lot of things. And as we've seen in all the litigation that's been going on over the last year, what the FDA is requiring is really shifting sands. Not only are the goalposts moving on us, they're moving the entire playing field on us as we're trying to play. Imagine if you're a football player, an American football player, or a European football player, trying to kick the ball as the field is moving underneath you. That's kind of what we're facing.
Exactly. Okay. So you have worked on several. So some information for our viewers. All of these vapor manufacturers were required to submit this application by August of 2020 or September of 2020. I know, because I helped them do that. And then the FDA came out and pretty much issued massive marketing denial orders for all of these e-liquid manufacturers. They're flavored, or they're non-tobacco flavored products. And so what the vape lawyers did is some of them, y'all took them to court. Can you kind of explain some of these lawsuits and what's going on with those?
Well, it's even more, I'll go back a little bit further than that. A month before the application deadline, the FDA issued an internal memo that described how they were going to review all the applications. And the FDA has gotten everything wrong that they've dealt with here. The FDA grossly underestimated the size and scope of this industry, and always has. And so they predicated all of their application deadlines and compliance deadlines upon a belief that there were going to be relatively few applications, PMTAs, filed. In fact, the industry filed 6.7 million applications, and each product SKU has to have a separate application. So 6.7 million, they were expecting a couple thousand. It's proportions beyond what they ever expected. Well, their infrastructure wasn't set up for what they got, and they scrambled. They had to have a way to, and they were under a lot of political pressure from members of Congress on the Democratic side, particularly, and a lot of the interest groups, the PAVE moms, Parents Against Vaping, the anti-tobacco groups like Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, Truth Initiative, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and then some of the health groups like Heart, Lung, Cancer we're really putting political pressure on FDA to get these applications adjudicated quickly. Well, it's a queue problem. You've only got so much capacity and you've got a lot of intake. Then we had COVID happening. At this time, FDA still wasn't even in their offices yet. They were still working remotely. So this is a lot of problems here. Well, FDA had a memo that came out in August, of 2020, where they said, here's how we're going to handle the PMTAs. We're going to put them all together in a bundle, and we're going to bracket them out based on high and low nicotine strengths. We're going to pull a composite sample of all the PMTAs to come up with a baseline. And then we're going to operate off that baseline. Well, you don't know who's going to be part of that sample. You might be part of that sample. You might not be part of that sample. You don't know. You might have had a small mom and pop company and Juul in the same bundle. Different, way far different companies, but they would have been looked at to create that composite. So it's like a test curve. You know, your curve is going to be somewhere you're in the middle, your median and somewhere in the middle, or depends on the your scores. Well, that's not what FDA did. What FDA did is right after the PMTAs were submitted, FDA decided we're going to change the game plan, and we're going to require you to show proof that your products are effective at promoting smoking cessation versus a other tobacco product. And so what they did is for flavored vape products, FDA said you're going to have to show that your flavored product is more effective than a non-flavored product or a tobacco flavored product at causing smoking cessation. That's not what the metric is under the Tobacco Control Act. The metric is that it is less harmful in general compared to other tobacco products, i.e. cigarettes. That's not a very difficult thing to show, because as we know, the Brits have shown that they're 95% less harmful. Should be an easy thing to show. Well, if that was an easy thing to show, everybody we know would have gotten a marketing acceptance order. Every flavored product that FDA has adjudicated to date has gotten a marketing denial order. Every non-tobacco flavored product, I should say, has gotten and that is from Juul, which then they put them back into review because FDA really screwed this up, to the mom and pops. Everybody has gotten to denial. But FDA's position is, oh, we have not adopted a ban on flavors. That's what they're arguing in court. So late last year, starting in September and October, a number of these people who got marketing denials filed appeals. And the process is you file an appeal in the federal appeals court where your company's located in that circuit. And so there were cases pending in there's 12 federal regional circuits in the United States. There's cases pending in 10 of those 12 circuits. That's a lot. That is a lot of litigation. We at one point had so many cases coming that the Department of Justice had to bring in lawyers from other branches of the government to help them out. Yes.
Is it true that the FDA sat there and told them this, or was it true that one of the courts told the FDA to quit issuing MDOs because there's too many cases going to the courts?
It wasn't the courts that told them, it was the department. From what I understand, it was the Department of Justice's management told FDA, pump the brakes on these MDOs because they're coming so fast that we can't handle. They were having to bring in lawyers from other branches of the government, of the Department of Justice, to handle these cases.
Can I ask? I'm from the UK, and we have a different system than PMTAs. We have a notification system in the UK and Europe,
right?
Which is obviously far simpler because it doesn't mean having to authorize each individual product. There's a list of ingredients you're not allowed to use. You have to notify what's in your product, and then you go ahead if there are no objections. It's kind of the other way around to the PMTA process. But I wonder, well, how did a bureaucracy like the FDA, when it has this process where it has to authorize each individual product, how did it underestimate the market so badly?
That's a good question. I don't think the FDA really ever went out on the street and looked at what was there. If FDA would have sent people to a vape trade show, they would have very quickly seen this is a lot bigger than what we think it is.
Yeah, because it seems that seems to me to be the root of the problem. They've been overwhelmed because they haven't done the foundation work to start off with before they started the process. So am I right in saying that?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right in saying that. And one person you could reasonably conclude based on what we've seen it actually occur that FDA, really didn't matter to FDA how big the industry was because they didn't plan to let us survive anyway. Their plan going forward was. Now, what makes me think that might not be true is this August 2020 memo where they talked about the bundling in the bracketing, because they knew at that point what they had. They knew when we filed our first submissions, I think it was in November of 16, literally it shut down the FDA's computers several different times. FDA was still running a Windows 90, I think 95 or 98 server. Yeah, they were still running a Windows 95 or 98 system in 2016. And the mass of submissions was so great that it shut down the server multiple times. They did not know what was coming. They totally missed the ball here.
You mean to tell me that the vaping technology is more modern than what the FDA was using to regulate said vaping technology?
Well, but you have to remember, Lindsay, when they would get a PMTA from traditional tobacco companies, it wouldn't be, they would only get a couple of applications. They were looking at their prior experience and saying, well, we think we're only going to get 2,500 applications based on their prior experience. Well, we're unlike anything of their prior experience.
Well, exactly. And I was talking with Martin the other day about it, and kind of we were ruminating over it. I mean, the Tobacco Control Act doesn't seem to be a very good standard as far as introducing new products to market. If anything, it seems that the FDA is limited by it. And like reading through the MRTP process that's in the TCA is more put in there to prevent companies from introducing products. It was like, oh, our products are less harmful. Well, if you're going to sit here and say that, you have to go through this really mundane process.
You're right. You're right. You're right. Well, if you look at the origin and the history of the Tobacco Control Act and what was going on in that time period and slightly before then, the Tobacco Control Act was the traditional tobacco, the legacy tobacco companies' gift for being good corporate stewards in signing the Master Settlement Agreement a decade before. The Tobacco Control Agreement was written by the tobacco companies for the tobacco companies to prevent competition.
Actually, in the EU, we were talking about that because we're like, okay, we're comparing how vaping products come to market. You can bring a new cigarette product to market in the EU, as long as it just follows that requirements. It seems like the only way you can bring a new cigarette to the US market is if it's a no nicotine cigarette. All the tar, none of the buzz. But
I've got a client here, and they do business in the EU and in the UK, and they have to make a totally separate bottle size, and everything has to be different in the EU than it is here, but the formulations are exactly the same. And to get their products approved, now I forgot how many products they had, product SKUs they had. It was over 100. To get those approved for the EU and the UK was like $600,000. For them to do all of the testing and everything that the FDA was going to require was going to be $120 million, because FDA requires you to test each product. And so, for instance, if you've got for example, you've got a sour apple product and 5 nicotine strengths, you've got to test each of those nicotine strengths multiple times. So expand that out over, so you've got 100 products, 100 product SKUs. That explains why it's $120 million. It's ludicrous.
Well, it's ludicrous too with all these companies that I did people's PMTAs with these small ones, and it was amazing to see how many they had the same recipes. And it's like, okay, why are you spending money for testing yours compared to that person?
Well, and that's the lunacy of this. We know from within the industry, there's only 2 or 3 or 4 companies that make flavors that are being used. There's only a handful of companies that are making the PG and the VG and the nicotine that's being used. And there's not a nickel's worth of difference between the sour apple that Tom Jones makes and the sour apple that Perry Smith makes. They're pretty much the same product. Now, one of them might contain a little bit more flavoring than the other. One of them might be a 60-40 VG versus a 70-30 VG. But in essence, it's the same product. Different label, different bottle, same product. But they're treated all different.
At the e-cig Summit US this year, Matt Holman was on one of the panels, and he was coming under fire from people like Clive Bates for the FDA process. And at one point he said something along the lines of, well, that's just the constraints that we're under. By that, what was he saying? Is he saying that they can't change this process, they're tied into it? And if so, who dictates the process? And who is oversight to the FDA? Can't someone step in and say, this is failing, let's change it, let's do something different?
Well, you've got two dynamics working here. Working. You've got the language of the Tobacco Control Act will constrain the FDA to some respect, but that is written in such vague language. The standard is that you have to show that it's appropriate for the protection of public health. That's a nebulous, open-ended standard, which gives FDA a lot of discretion. Then the second constraint, which I think is really what's driving things here, is agency management. And the people like Matt Holman that were on the ground. Oh, by the way, the August 2020 memo, the bundling and bracketing memo that I'm talking about, was authored by none other than Matt Holman. And they actually said in there, we're going to do this because it's the traditional way that we've handled PMTAs, tobacco PMTAs. Okay, so it's consistency. That's good. We like the agency being consistent. And that it was designed they were doing it so that the maximum number of products would pass the PMTA as possible. Well, who was the president and who ran FDA and HHS in August of 2020? It was the Trump administration, who he showed he was willing to work with us and be flexible with us. Remember, Alex Azar, the HHS secretary, promised a streamlined PMTA process for small businesses. Guess what this bundling and bracketing memo was? The streamlined process that had been promised. Well, election happens, and elections have consequences. New administration comes in. Totally different mindset. Who did Biden pick to be the FDA commissioner? Robert Califf, who had been the FDA commissioner under Obama, who was there when the deeming rule was adopted back in 2016. His mindset hadn't changed in the 4 years he was out of the government. So management has one view, the ground level employees have a different view. And I think in some respects, the ground level employees have tried to throw management under the bus. We talked about the litigation. The fatal flaw memo that was the big deal about a year ago. Matt Holman is also the one who authored that memo. That got leaked out to the industry. So management is on one page, the rank and file people are on another page. I think the CTP people think that we're right. I think that's a good part of why Holman left. I think it's a good part of why Zeller left, is that they're the ones being constrained. And when he talks about we're being constrained, it's by management.
Yeah, it does seem that there's a lot of there's a lot of politics behind it instead of harm reduction. And that that they've lost the science part. But it does seem I talked with Matt Holman at the e-cigarette summit. I think I was the only one who apologized to him. I was like, I would not want to be at the FDA right now. You've got Congress coming at you. You've got big companies coming at you. You got big tobacco coming at you. Like, you are really caught between a rock and a hard place right now. Moving forward, so we saw with these lawsuits and these federal courts, some of them, they didn't, the courts, I sided with the FDA. Now, a couple of them, actually, we did have a victory with the one circuit court that, pushed the agency now has to go back over those people's PMTAs. Can you talk more about that? And is that really hopeful for all the people, especially now as we look at what they're going to do with synthetic nicotine applications?
Well, yeah, I'll talk about that. We've had 4 cases have been argued, or 5 cases have been argued to date. One of them was argued just a month or so ago in San Francisco. The 4 cases that were argued early have all gotten decisions, and we lost 3 of them, which was the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans in the Troutman case. That case has gone up on what's called en banc rehearing. Troutman has asked the entire Fifth Circuit to rehear the case. And in a positive sign, the Fifth Circuit has ordered FDA to file a response. So, you know, we've got at least 4 of those judges, the 3 judges on the motion panel that granted the stay, and then Judge Jones on the merits panel, who wrote a excoriating dissent in our favor. I think they're going to lean towards rehearing. If we get a rehearing in Troutman, I think we'll win that. Prohibition lost their case in DC. I lost my case for Gripham in the 7th Circuit, but a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, the 11th Circuit in Atlanta issued a 70-page opinion for 3 companies, for three different cases, but I think there were like 6 or 7 companies consolidated. And the important thing of that case, not only did we win, but the court recognized a distinction between the risks of the open system products and the closed system products as to youth. Because this is what FDA has predicated all of this on, and its position on flavors, is that they're attractive to youth and the youth are using them for the flavors. And the 11th Circuit recognized that may be true for closed system products, but it's not true for open system products. And FDA, your own data shows that, and you know that for a fact, because in the January 2020 flavor guidance, which is what Trump gave us, that made the closed system flavored product come off the market until they got PMTA approval, FDA talked about the recognition of the low risks that open system products cause, and they know that the kids were using the closed system products. Then the FDA's counter to that in court has been, well, we believe that there's a cross elasticity of demand among different products. And they cited that when they took the pods off the market, the kids went to the disposables. Again, that's a closed system product. And the problem is the way our law here works is that the courts give a lot of deference to agencies. And that's the bad thing. We do now have a circuit split where we've got certain circuits are saying FDA wins. We've got a circuit now that says we win. This is why the Troutman case is so important. If we get rehearing and they reverse course, then we've got 2 circuits saying we're right, which makes it more likely that other circuits will follow those. But having a circuit split in the United States, when you have a circuit split, the US Supreme Court ultimately gets to be the arbiter of who's right. So at some point, this is going to end up in the lap of the Supreme Court. Whether it's my case out of the 7th Circuit that goes, whether it's the FDA seeks cert in the Supreme Court in the Biddy case from the 11th Circuit, or whether FDA does it in Troutman, or whether Troutman does it if they lose down there, it's going to end up before SCOTUS.
That's going to be interesting to see what would happen if it ends up in front of the Supreme Court. The FDA, I think, is just really overwhelmed, I guess, on all of this. And what also bothers me too is that they keep citing youth use of these products, yet youth use of all e-cigarette products, closed or open, has declined, significantly declined in the years since the PMTAs were due.
And this is what is sort of logically dysfunctional about this. To support FDA's conclusion, they don't cite the 2020, 2021 NYTS. They cite the 2019 NYTS. They keep harping on the 20, which is stale data. That data is 3 years old. And yes, I guarantee you, we're going to see a delay in the 2022 NYTS coming out, because I don't think they're going to like the results.
We're already seeing a delay in the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's Youth Risk Behavior Survey data. Then that breaks it down by the states. And I was going through it when they published it in the previous years, and I mean they the 2019 results, they published that back in like the 24th of August, 2020. So it's like you publish in the middle of a pandemic, the first year of it. Don't blame COVID right now. So
I can see why the 2020 data went down, because the kids were locked up and weren't able to get out and socialize, and that's how the kids passed the vapes around. 2021, the numbers were still down.
Well, they were still down too in states that didn't have lockdowns. So like states like Florida, I just went through Arizona's numbers today. Those were decreasing. So it's just, when you look at youth vaping, especially look at 2019 numbers, it was a fad. Okay. I mean, just like a lot of other things when it comes to kids, it was really big. And then now, a lot of, the parents against vaping, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, these groups should actually be celebrating this, but they're very all or nothing. One kid vaping is one too many.
Well, and this is also an incongruity, is that FDA doesn't cite the regular use data. They cite if you're a kid and you go to a party on Friday night and you take one puff off of one vape, you're considered a user. That's the data they use. They don't look at the regular users, that is the kids who use 20 or more days a month. That is a infinitesimally small number. But that number doesn't, it's like the old thing, if it bleeds, it leads. That number doesn't have any sex appeal to it. It gets FDA nowhere. It doesn't drive their narrative. So what do is they concoct the number that really doesn't mean anything, but it has a lot of shock value to it.
Absolutely. Well, okay, since we're running out of time, Martin, if you've got anything you want to say last, and any last words from you, Greg, too?
I've got one last question. It refers to what you just said there about changing the definition of a user, just to someone who might have used a vape at a party just once. And I've always said with harm reduction, the science is on our side, like we're on the side of the angels on this debate. And it seems to me the other side are scratching around, trying to find ways, think up ways of going against this. So there's one there was like inflating the vaping figures by saying that's one person vaping. You've got the WHO is redefining the word smoke at the moment to try and include vapor in that, and you've got the Truth Initiative trying to change the definition of harm reduction itself.
Absolutely.
So how long can they carry on doing this? I mean, surely eventually it's inexorable. It's going to go our way.
Here's the dirty little secret. If the adult smoking rate gets to 10% or less, these NGOs start losing funding and start losing their fundraising and their funding from their grants. They can't have that. They have to have the boogie. The boogeyman is the cigarette. They have to have the boogeyman continuously out there chasing it. It's like the dog chasing the car. What happens if the dog catches the car? If smoking goes away, if they get their goal, it always has to be an ever elusive goal, because it's about the money for them. They can't give that up. Last thing they want, if the American Cancer Society wanted cancer cured, it'd have been cured a long time ago. But if cancer's cured, they got no purpose anymore.
It is a really sad state of affairs on all of that. Well, Greg, do you have any advice for, I guess, anybody who's listening to this? I guess, especially if we got any manufacturers that are like, really fearful of the FDA right now.
What I've told people is keep doing what you're doing until they literally come and put a gun to your head and make you stop. I mean, until they're literally ready to take you away in chains. Keep doing what you're doing.
FYI, TPA is not endorsing that, people. All right, so
right.
Just to clarify that.
This is because what FDA is doing is they've come under a lot of fire for this. Is they're really not aggressively enforcing against people who don't have PMTAs.
Exactly.
The
disposables, the Chinese, the fake disposables coming out of China. It's really sad that that FDA is essentially shutting down American companies, all the while letting these counterfeit products flourish. And not only that, I mean, think about you have no oversight. You have no idea what you're vaping in those.
And FDA is doing a miserable job, and they're just doing lip service to appease Congress, to appease the NGOs and the anti-tobacco groups. That are coming under fire because they're livid. Matthew Myers is beside himself that FDA won't be more aggressive. He wants everybody shut down right now.
Yes. Yeah.
Would that just one last quick question? If it did go to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court came down on the side of the manufacturers and the FDA was forced to start allowing these products on the market. Would that almost be a sigh of relief to them, that they can then just say to all the anti-vaping lot, well, it's not our fault, the Supreme Court has ordered us to do it?
That would be, they could do that, but it gives us it means a whole new regime has to be negotiated. And this industry needs to be in a position in organized and all in agreement, which is another part of our problem. We can't agree on anything, but we need to be at that table and be aggressive in helping write this new regime. We should never be under the Tobacco Control Act to begin with. That's number one thing. We should have our own product category and be treated like we are a product. We're treated like cigarettes. We're having to go through the exact same process that a new cigarette would have to go through if it came to market right now. And it's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, that was one good thing that the EU's TPD did, that it differentiated between tobacco products and between e-cigarettes, which was a fantastic thing for us over here.
Which has always been sort of a logical disconnect for me, is the body and the lungs and everything else are the same in the EU and in England as they are here. You know, the products that you sell there are the same products as you sell here. The effects of the people are going to be the same. The regulation really ought to be harmonized.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a really good way to end all of this. And Greg, thank you for joining us. I'm sure we'll be in much contact as all these things goes forward. To our viewers, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Across the Pond with me and Martin, and we hope you'll join us for our next episode. Thank you.